Siman Tes Vov Seif Vov. Okay, we're just on the last Seif discussing what we've been talking about for the last few shiurim, which is this issue of sewing up a tear near the corner of the garment. Okay, we're just on the last point to do with this, and then we'll move on to the next siman. Okay, so on Siman Tes Vov Seif Vov, page 55. The Shulchan Aruch Seif Vov, that's 3 lines from the top. Someone who sews a piece of garment onto the corner of the talis. And similarly, someone who what we're accustomed to do, which is to sew a reinforcement around the hole where the tzitzis hang from. Right? Both of these we do. Right? We have on the corner they sew usually a piece of silk, because they sew a nice piece of material on the corner, and also they do a reinforcement around the corner.
Right.
Okay. If it's a silk talus and he sews it with a silk thread, or similarly a cotton talus with a cotton thread, or a woolen talus with a woolen thread. According to Rashi, one's going to have a problem unless he makes sure that he doesn't sew within the place which is kosher to hang tzitzis. Remember, the place to kosher to hang tzitzis is between a minimum of a kesher agudon from the edge of the garment and a maximum of 3 etzbois. Right? So the reinforcement they do, the piece that they stick on the corner and they sew around it, that we're going to be okay, because if they just sew around the edge of that, right, then on 2 sides of that corner, the tear is going to be on the very, very edge of the garment. Right, which is okay to sew there because it's too close to the edge to hang tzitzis. Remember, the whole problem, according to Rashi, is to leave a string hanging in a place where it's kosher to make tzitzis, because maybe you'll use that string for tzitzis. So those 2 sides of the corner, I guess we demonstrate with the talis.
There's one over there, right?
Yeah.
One right
there. Yeah. Now this, there we go. I have a piece on the corner here. So these 2 sides are definitely not problematic because they're less than the kesher agudol. The minimum size, the minimum place you could put a tzitzis is this. This is the kesher agudol from the edge of the garment. So any string, anywhere you sewed, which is less than that distance, I mean this whole area here, is not kosher for hanging tzitzis. So here that opposite is true, meaning it's going to be perfectly okay to sew in this area. Okay, this area is also okay to sew, because this is already more than 3 etzbois from the edge of the garment, right? Which means that this whole area and the whole rest of the garment is not kosher to hang tzitzis on there. You can't hang tzitzis on this part of the garment. If you can't hang tzitzis here, then the converse is true, that here it's not a problem if you sew. Okay, remember the whole problem according to Rashi is to sew a thread in a place where it's kosher to hang tzitzis. The area where it's kosher to hang tzitzis is this area here, within this area here, right? Around approximately. So this is fine, and this is fine. This is less than kesher agudol from the side, and this is more than 3 etzbois from the side. Okay? The problem is our reinforcement hole. Our reinforcement hole here, where they've also sewn, that is in the place which is kosher for tzitzis. So how can one do that? It's a problem according to Rashi. Okay? So again, the Shulchan Aruch is going to mention that the answers we've seen so far is for this which is a woolen garment. There's only going to be a problem if one uses a thread which is kosher as tzitzis on this garment, which in this case is, on a woolen garment, the only thread that's kosher is wool. So as long as they've shown that they haven't sewn this with wool, even if this is a cotton, nylon, what they've sewn it with, it's perfectly okay.
As long as it's not wool.
As long as it's not a woolen thread. If it's going to be a cotton pair of tzitzis, then one may not use either wool or cotton. Both wool or cotton would be kosher to use as tzitzis. So therefore the thread shouldn't be woolen or cotton. Right? So therefore it's best to use the nylon thread. We mentioned another 8 of the Mishnah mentioned, which is use a coloured thread. You mentioned you've seen tzitzis like that, but it's a coloured thread. Yeah. Right? Because we make tzitzis only white, so if one uses a black thread, it also wouldn't be good for tzitzis. So that's another 8. Right? If all else fails, someone only has a cotton thread, and he needs to say this is a cotton garment, cotton thread, nothing else. There's always the fallback plan. According to the Mishnah, that wouldn't be good, but the fallback is the Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan was one of the main achronim. He was at the same time in the Mishnah. He came out with his sefer around the same time in the Mishnah. he was a big posek in Russia, and he says that seeing as nowadays we only make tzitzis from wool, we're noheg to only make from wool, even though it is kosher, even though one could use, even though one can theoretically use, put cotton tzitzis on a cotton garment, however we don't. We're noheg to only put on wool. Right? The cotton tzitzis are kosher on a cotton garment,
Right.
but we don't. We only put on wool. So therefore, he says, seeing as we only put on wool, so therefore, as regards this halacha, it would be okay to use a cotton thread, because anyway we're not going to use it, because the minhag nowadays is not to use cotton. Okay, so that's the fallback plan. One should try and avoid it. If it's a cotton garment, one should avoid doing this reinforcement with the cotton thread. As we said, either use a different thread like nylon, or use a coloured thread. In the worst case scenario, when you only have a white cotton thread, then there's always the Aruch HaShulchan to fall back on.
With the threads on the outside that are not in the area, it doesn't matter what kind of thread you use?
Threads on the outside, over here?
Yes.
No, that's outside the area, so then
It doesn't matter what kind of thread.
You can use whatever you
Does it
want.
matter who does it? That's not to be.
No.
That doesn't have to be the shame, beged.
No.
So, for example, my corner's coming up. I can have whoever sew it.
Yeah. Okay.
If the tear is within the reinforced area,
Yeah.
then it can be within the area that you could hang tzitzit, obviously.
Again, if the tear is
Let's say there's a tear here, right?
Yeah.
That you want to repair.
Yeah.
Then you run into that problem
Right.
again,
Right.
with
Right.
Rashi's problem.
Right.
What's
Right.
bothering Rashi?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, fine. We've talked about it. Well, let's just finish reading the words of the Shulchan Aruch, and then we'll move on to the next simon. We've summarized everything he's going to say. Let's read the words there. I think we're to the end of the Shulchan Aruch. Not to do more. Hagov hu adin b'chol mokom shetove b'chutshu min hatzitzis techayshinu shemoneh-esrei lechut hatzitzis, which is the point you just mentioned, which is, and so too, not just with this reinforcement or with this extra piece tied on. Wherever one does any piece of sewing in that red area, one has to be, according to Rashi, one should not use a string which is the same material as the garment or woolen, because that would be a problem according to Rashi. Okay.
It's actually the same material as the other tzitzit, in fact, right?
Sorry, what's the same material?
Is it the same material as the garment, or is it the same material as the other tzitzit?
The same material
On
as
that
the
corner.
the same material as the garment. Kosher on the garment must use either the woolen or the same material as the garment. The other tzitzis will be either or, right? The other
Right.
tzitzis also will either be wool if it's a cotton garment.
So it's the same thing.
Yeah. Nowadays we only use wool, which is why the Aruch HaShulchan says that, as we said, that it would not be a problem to use a cotton thread, because we only use wool. But in theory, one could put on cotton tzitzis.
In-
It'd be kosher.
In a cotton garment,
Yeah.
you could use cotton or wool.
Correct.
Can you mix them?
Can you mix them?
Say on one corner, could you have
Yeah.
two strings that are cotton and two strings that are wool?
Yeah.
You
I
could.
think so. We haven't seen anything to say not like that. Okay. Let's move on. Simon Tes Zayin, new simon. Shira talis. How big the talis has to be? What's the minimum size? Okay. Shulchan Aruch Sif Aleph. Let's read the first thing. Shira talis shechai b'tzitzis sheis kaseh bo bo'irech u'beroichav roishoy v'ruboy shel cotton hamishalech levadoi bashuk ve'enisov achar l'shomre. Okay. The share of the talis, which is chai b'tzitzis, is enough, a garment large enough to cover the length and width. With its length and width, the talis is length and width are large enough to cover the head and most of the body of a child. A child who's a cotton, he's a minor, but he's old enough to walk by himself in the marketplace, and he doesn't need someone else to look after him. We're going to see the Mishnah is going to define for us that age.
This is a talis gadol.
This is
Not a talis katan.
any garment for tzitzis includes a talis cotton as well, right? Which means we're going to run into problems with the talis cotton. Our talis gadol is definitely big enough, right? But our talis cotton also, in order if it's too small, then one wouldn't have to put tzitzis on.
But talis katan never covers the head.
So we're going to see. We're going to wait till we've defined this exactly, and then. We won't have to talk about it. The Mishnah Boy is going to talk about your very problem, the talis cotton nowadays. Right. Okay. Hagor says the Ramah, "V'oz chai b'tzitzis," then chai b'tzitzis. V'davka k'shagodoi lo yuvshoy He adds on an extra condition that it also has to be large enough that the godel, an adult, would wear it occasionally and go out with it into the marketplace. Okay, as you're mentioning, our talis cotton is clearly who's going to go out outdoors with our talis cotton. Right? We're talking about using it as your main garment, not as hidden underneath your garments. Right? No one nowadays would go out with their tzitzis, their talis cotton, and to the outside with it. It's too small. Right? So according to this definition, maybe it wouldn't be chayv in tzitzis, and we're not used to the mitzvah tzitzis, perhaps. So let's see. Let's wait until we've defined it exactly, and then we'll see. Okay, let's have a look at the Mishnah Berurah. So we've seen two conditions here. We're going to first discuss the first condition, which is it has to be large enough to cover the head and most of the body of a cotton, of a child, old enough to go out to the marketplace by himself. It says in the Mishnah Berurah of Cotton Aleph, V'hainu ben teisha shonim. And we're now to the Mishnah Berurah, 2 lines from the bottom of page 55. He says, V'hainu ben teisha shonim. He's giving us an exact age, right, which is 9 years old. Okay, which agrees with the rules here. They put on big signs and don't let your child cross the road before age 9. They have it all the way around the city. So,
How did they find it from here?
Sorry?
How they got their drilling from here?
They got it from the Mishnah Berurah, yeah. 9 years old. 9 years old.
Always wanted
I think it's a national, I don't know, it's a law or something.
It's not that it's...
Yeah. So they got it from there, yeah. 9 years old. Okay. B'tshuva Surumah, Simon Kufyud, Mefalt al-Heich Yotz in Bedalet Kampes HaKtanim Mizeh HaShir. Okay, we haven't yet discussed the exact shear, but the Ramah already had the problem in his day that people were wearing the talis cotton was smaller than this shear. So he said, how is one yotz if it's smaller? He says that one's not really yotz to the mitzvah, but it is, one still is wearing some sort of regular tzitzis. And it's better to wear this than not to wear anything. So he says that the Ramah writes in Sefer Darkei Moshe that one shouldn't make a bracha on such a talis, and we should tell people to rather make a bracha on their talis godel, which they put on during Shachris, and have in mind to put also the talis cotton. Because the talis cotton is often less than the correct shear, it's too small. In terms of whether one should wear it or not, the Ramah says yes, it's better to wear this all day than not to wear anything. However, he's worried about making the bracha on such a garment, because if it's too small and one's not used to the mitzvah, then one can't make a bracha on it. And therefore he says one should make a bracha on the talis godel that one puts on during davening and patter the talis cotton. Okay? So this is always going to be the fallback plan. We're going to see in a minute the minimum shear, right? Even if one's tzitzis are less than the minimum shear, one always has the Ramah to fall back on, right? Which is what we do nowadays. Which is we don't make a bracha. People, anyone who's married and wears a talis, or an area in Kehillas where bochim also wear talisim, which is what I did. I put on the talis already from age 6, 7. I was wearing a talis, so therefore I never made a bracha on my talis cotton, because I read once you put on your talis cotton, we make the minhag is we make the bracha on the talis godol, and that patters our talis cotton. Right, so that's always the fallback plan. If our tzitzis are going to be less than the minimum shear, which we're going to see in a minute what that is.
There are communities where people don't make a bracha and don't put a talis gadol on until they're married.
That's what I said. So I said for married people or for people. So in Kehillas where it's less than that, where bochum don't wear a talis gadol. So therefore, for a bochum to make a talis, he's going to have to make sure it's going to cover it's going to be bigger than the minimum shear, which we're going to see. Right? As I said, for married people and for people who wear a talis even below married, before they get married, they always have their Ramah to fall back on.
Right.
They're not going to be making a bracha on their talis cotton. So it's going to be okay. Okay, so let's carry on. We're now on the top of the next page. If, however, if one can wear a talis cotton, which is the correct shear, then it's wonderful. That's obviously clearly the best thing to do, even in such a situation where one isn't making bracha on the talis cotton. It's clearly best if he's walking around all day wearing a talis which is enough to be become the mitzvah, rather than just wearing a token, something to remind him of the mitzvah, which is too small. Now, of course, it's a mitzvah saseh, one can use it every second in a very passive way without even thinking about it, without any effort. So therefore, it's clearly better if one makes sure one has talis cotton which is bigger than the minimum share, which we'll see in a minute what that is. ויעשה הכתפיים של הטלס קוטון רחובים כדי שיהיו ניכרים ויהיו עליהם תורס בגד ולא ישהם בצורס. Besides for the shear of the actual garment we're going to see, the shoulder straps which connect the front part to the back part should not be just thin straps. They should be wide enough that they are nicker and they have on them the shape togas beged. They shouldn't look like a strap. It should look like part of the beged. Okay? And the Mishnah Berurah doesn't give a minimum shear for this. He just mentions that it should be wide enough that it's not a strap. It's actually a garment. The Chazon Ish does give a shear. The Chazon Ish holds that it has to be wider than the neck hole. Each side has to be wider than the gap in the middle. He holds if it's smaller than the gap in the middle, then it's if it's not there, because there's a gap on one side, outside the beggar, there's a gap of the neck hole, and if the piece in between is smaller, then the two gaps are just mevatel the piece of garment in the middle. So he holds that each side has to be larger than the neck hole in width. Think about the width.
Can I just back up for a second? This question about the size, and if it's smaller than the shear, you've mekayim mitzvah by making the bracha on the talis gadol. That's one way that the talis katan is not meeting the requirements. Right? There are many other ways, which we learned earlier. Right? How many of them are covered by wearing a beged that doesn't really qualify, or a talis that doesn't really qualify, katan, and making the bracha on the gadol? Let's say you had the actual tzitzit that were snapped. Right. So you when you look at it, you say it's not really kosher.
Well, again, if you're wearing, this is a different problem. If one is wearing a beged, a garment which is chayiv in tzitzis, and the tzitzis are problematic, posel, then it's even worse, because now one's wearing a garment which is chayiv in tzitzis, and he's not wearing tzitzis on it. Yes, so that's much better. He's being over, he has to take it off straight away. He's being over an issue of wearing a garment with four corners without tzitzis.
And yet, if he's wearing a garment with four corners that isn't the shear of tzitzis,
then it's not chayiv in tzitzis. It's very different. Here the problem is the opposite. He's not chayiv in tzitzis. The garment is not large enough to be chayiv in tzitzis. There's not a beged which the Torah said about it, put on tzitzis.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay?
Yep.